Welcome folks, you are listening to the A Minute to Midnight show. My name's Tony, and today on the show we have Tim Alberino, and I have to say I'm totally rapt because we've been trying to get Tim for a long time. He's been on the top of our list of people we haven't had on the show, and Brooke was able to nail him down to this a few days ago, so I'm rapt, and retrospectively I can tell you this is one of the best A Minute to Midnight shows we've ever done. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'm sure you will get a lot out of it. It's jam-packed with amazing information. I want to offer a very warm welcome to Tim Alberino for the A Minute to Midnight show. Tim has been on the top of our wanted to have guest list for quite a long time of people we haven't got, so it's great to be talking to you today, Tim.
Well, it's great to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, and I've been really looking forward to it. Back in March this year, I was in Louisiana with Brooke, who's our show coordinator and things, and we sat down together and watched The Unholy Sea, and because she had a copy of it, and I got to say, I was so impressed with it, the True Legends Unholy Sea, that I ordered a copy while I was over there and bought it so that I wouldn't have to pay the shipping back to New Zealand, and brought it back. And subsequently, I've seen the next one that followed that as well, where you talk about Sardinia and things. And man, I got to say, they're must-watch DVDs. If anyone hasn't got them, I totally recommend that they get them. So, firstly, The Unholy Sea. Why do you think that the Vatican is so interested in giants?
Well, it's not merely an interest in giants as it pertains to the Vatican. What we're dealing with is a broad cover-up of the pre-flood world in general, and indeed the very history of the human race and of planet Earth that's being covered up. So it's not specific to giants. It's much broader in scope, and the implications that are associated with the history, the true history of the human race, going back into the antediluvian world, are directly connected to the prophetic future. In other words, the prehistoric past is the key to understanding the prophetic future. And as you probably are well aware of, there is a concerted effort to control the direction of humanity's future, and to, at some point in time, to hand over control of the dominion that rightly belongs to the human race to the devil. And so this is all part of the cover-up. This is all incorporated into this global concealment of history, including giants, including all kinds of things that do not fit into the conventional historical paradigm.
Yeah, very true. And there is, we're all aware, I think, of the cover-up with the Smithsonian Institute and different things as well, covering up the true history. I watched a short video of you with L.A. Marzulli, and, we've had him on the show a few times, probably 4 or 5 times. And I don't know if I can pronounce this word properly, Ollantaytambo in Peru, and you were looking at some incredible Cyclopean walls in the Cusco region, and the precision of those walls is absolutely incredible. So firstly, can you maybe explain to our listeners what Cyclopean masonry is?
Yes, in that video, I was with LA at it's pronounced Ollantaytambo.
Yeah, that's it.
And very few people know how to really pronounce it, but it is, Ollantaytambo is one of the best examples of Cyclopean architecture. Now, what is Cyclopean architecture? Cyclopean architecture is a word that was coined by the intellectual community, by the scientific community, to describe a kind of architecture that uses that employs large stones, sometimes uncut stones, sometimes very finely cut stones, such as in the walls of Ollantaytambo, without the use of mortar. These stones are fitted together with such precision that mortar is not necessary to bind them together. Now, this is a kind of advanced masonry, the likes of which we cannot, at least in some cases, we cannot reproduce today. And one of the sites that certainly we would have a very difficult time to remake, even with our modern technological implements, are the walls of Sacsayhuaman and other sites around the world that are similar in terms of the size, the sheer mass of the walls. We cannot imagine how ancient peoples, at least logically thinking individuals, cannot imagine how pre-Columbian cultures who were not in possession of the wheel and who were using very crude tools for masonry could have devised the walls of Sacsayhuaman, which employ stones that literally weigh hundreds of tons and were quarried 20, 30, up to 50 miles away. So what we have here is a real enigma in terms of this archaeological Cyclopean masonry, this Cyclopean masonry that is found all over the earth. So there's an archaeological enigma regarding how did it get there, who built it, what was the technology that was used in its construction, and why did the building of megaliths suddenly come to an abrupt end all over the earth? Well, the answer to that final query is quite easy to give if you're coming from a biblical paradigm. The flood literally liquidated an antediluvian, a pre-flood culture from the earth overnight. And so the construction of the most impressive, the most refined Cyclopean edifices came to a sudden halt from one day to the next. Now, I am of the persuasion that in the post-flood context, there were, of course, the offspring of the Watchers, the offspring of the fallen angels from the Genesis 6 affair, many of whom were in Canaan, were in the land of Canaan before and during the conquest of Canaan by Joshua and the Hebrews. And the Canaanites did retain some of the knowledge from before the flood, some of the knowledge pertaining to the masonry, the Cyclopean masonry was retained somehow or recuperated, recovered, rediscovered, however you want to, whatever kind of context you want to put it in, by the Canaanites in a post-flood context, and was used to some degree with some success later on, such as in the megalithic constructions that are still standing to this day on the island of Sardinia, which we believe to be post-flood Cyclopean megaliths. And the difference between what I would consider a post-flood Cyclopean megalithic construction and a pre-flood Cyclopean megalithic construction is precisely in the refinement of the construction, the precision. For example, the walls of Sacsayhuaman and the walls at Ollantaytambo, to which you made reference, are very refined, are very precisely, the stones are very precisely cut and fitted together. They're very smooth. They have a beveled face to them, whereas the stone towers and the tombs of the giants on the island of Sardinia are very rough-hewn. They're not as refined. So what I think we're seeing, what we're discovering is some of the knowledge, some of the Cyclopean, the knowledge of Cyclopean masonry was rediscovered or recovered after the flood and was still being employed in certain places in the earth. But the vast majority of Cyclopean constructions have their origin in the world before the Great Flood.
So you see curved stones in those in Peru in those megalithic structures. I mean, that's incredible, and the precision and the tightness of that. I've heard some people say a lot of these things. They say they liquefied them and different stuff like that. I don't know. What are your thoughts on how on earth could it have been done?
Well, there's any number of possibilities. The Inca had an old legend that there was a substance that could be derived from certain kinds of plants that, if used properly, could soften stone. And you'll find this legend all over Peru. And indeed, in the jungle, there are birds. I forget the name of this particular kind of bird that uses a plant to actually hollow out and make holes in the rock face using the secretion from a certain kind of plant. So certainly this legend that the Inca kept may in fact give us a clue as to how these stones were softened, or it could be a process of it could be some kind of chemical process that we're totally unaware of today. But certainly something very interesting was going on in the building of the refined pre-flood megalithic constructions, because the precision is the elegance, the precision is absolutely mind-blowing. And it's, as I said before, we almost, in some of the cases at least, we cannot duplicate what was done thousands of years ago. So there was some kind of a technique being employed that we can only guess as to the true nature of the technology that was being used at the time. But certainly it was not copper chisels and stone hammers. That I think we can rule out for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And how on earth would they have even transported those huge stones of that size, Because they're not exactly on flat ground either.
Well, some people have postulated that the ancients were using, the antediluvians were using some form of sonic levitation, which I think that there could be something to that as well. Again, the Inca have a legend concerning sonic levitation. They believe that the constructions at Tiwanaku in Bolivia were devised by floating the stones through the air using trumpets. So by using some kind of sound, audio vibration, these large stones were able to be transported in a much more convenient way. This is what the Inca themselves recorded. At least this was not recorded in terms of on a manuscript or something like that. This was passed down through the generations as a folklore by word of mouth. So the Inca definitely did have some ideas as to how the megaliths were devised that were within their territory, Tawantinsuyu, the four regions of the Incan Empire. They never claimed to be the builders themselves of those megaliths. And the reason why I'm referencing the Inca is because some of the most impressive megaliths, certainly some of the most elegant megaliths on Earth, are located in Peru and Bolivia. And so we know that the megaliths are antediluvian, and we know that they were constructed using some kind of a technological process that is lost to us today. Those are the two things I can state with great assurance, having visited these megaliths myself and having done the research concerning them and concerning the myths and the legends that the Inca passed down. So I don't know exactly what kind of technology might have been employed, but we know what it would take to build these kinds of constructions today. And certainly it would not be chisels and hammers. It would be cranes and laser drills and all kinds of high-tech equipment that we use on a regular basis in the modern age to build very large constructions all over the earth. In fact, this is the only way that we know how to build these mega constructions, as they're called, not megaliths, just mega constructions, the very large constructions, whether they be bridges or skyscrapers. So we know that in a modern context, we have to use advanced technology. And yet, when looking back in time, we somehow equate the building of these impressive megalithic constructions to a lesser technology being employed by certainly a much cruder civilization. So it's absolutely illogical and it's irrational, and yet archaeologists and historians engage in this kind of absurd thinking on a daily basis all over the earth.
Yeah, well, they can't let the truth get out because it doesn't suit their agenda. Unfortunately, that's probably the reality of it. But just why do you think they chose specific sites for the building of these things? You know, did they have reasons why they were placed where they were?
Well, what's clear is that many, if not most, of the megaliths were built according to the Hermetic principle, as above, so below. In other words, they were aligned with the heavens, with the cosmos. And that can actually be proven and has been proven in many places, including Sacsayhuaman in Peru and Ollantaytambo. So we know that whoever the builders were, they were very knowledgeable about the heavens, about the constellations, the zodiac, and so forth. So they are certainly aligned, precisely aligned, sometimes aligned with one another, other times aligned with certain constellations. We can, of course, cite the most famous example, which would be the Great Pyramid and the other pyramids associated with it in Giza, the pyramids of Giza, which are famously aligned with the belt of Orion. And not only famously aligned, but precisely aligned with the belt of Orion. And that doesn't happen. That's not a function of happenstance. That is design. It's intentional. And that kind of intentional alignment with the heavens, again, requires a level of technological skill and knowledge that has obviously been lost in the earth, because it took us a very long time to recuperate that knowledge, which had been lost, of course, lost in the Great Cataclysm, which I believe to have been the flood of Noah, as recorded in the Bible.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's interesting you mentioned as above, so below, because that whole theology pervades all of occultism, and we're seeing it more and more creeping into everywhere else at the moment, including Christianity, which is a big worry. If we see how we get on with time, we might be able to talk about that a little bit more. But I just want to move on to Sardinia, because you visited there, and that also is fascinating what you discovered there.
Yes, Sardinia is, I always say this, that Sardinia is one of the most enigmatic places I've ever been. And that is unquestionably true. Sardinia is it's an ambiguous place. Most people don't know about the island of Sardinia, the history of it, who it belongs to, where it's located on a map. I certainly did not, until it was brought to my attention some years ago. And I think that that's actually quite intentional as it relates to the archaeological discoveries and that have been made on the island, many of which have been intentionally covered up and literally covered up. And that becomes quite apparent to the informed observer who decides to go and explore the island and take a look at the archaeological ruins. And there are many on the island of Sardinia. There are over on just this one island, which by the way is in the Western Mediterranean. It's located in the Western Mediterranean, not far from the city of Rome. It is a province of Italy. And on this one island, there were once over 30,000, and that's a conservative estimate, 30,000 megalithic towers, which are known as nuraghi, and which are said to have belonged to the mysterious Nuragic civilization. which, having done our investigation, I believe that the Nuragic civilization was none other than the Canaanites, the various tribes that inhabited the land of Canaan, both before and during the invasion, the conquest of Joshua, and that among the Canaanites, who later became the Phoenicians, the Greeks called them the Phoenicians, were a race of giants. And so that's the first thing you have to know about Sardinia, is that this Nuragic culture is very likely synonymous with the Canaanites. And when you get there, that becomes quite apparent. You have the figure of the bullhead all over the island, which is, of course, a reference to Molech, who was one of the principal gods of the Canaanites and later of the Phoenicians. And you have many of the customs that are practiced to this day that have their roots in Phoenician culture, i.e., e.g., in Canaanite culture. And so you find on the island not only 30,000 megalithic towers, Cyclopean megalithic towers. In other words, these towers were employed very large stones without the use of mortar, that were fitted together without the use of mortar, although these are rough-hewn stones, which I believe these towers were built in a post-flood context by the Canaanites. And associated with these towers are megalithic tombs, which are called to this day, and since antiquity, the tombs of the giants. And the tombs are always associated with the towers. You'll find the tombs always near or in the vicinity of the towers. Remember, over 30,000 towers on one island and thousands of tombs. And these megalithic tombs, some of them are relatively small, others are very large and have extremely heavy stones that were used in their construction. Stones that we would not be able to lift today without using mechanical cranes. So it's very apparent to me that the island was inhabited by giants, not exclusively by giants, but certainly there was a class, a race of giants that were inhabiting the island along with the rest of the populace. And these tombs that are all over the island, many of them have been disassembled for various reasons by the villagers, in some cases by archaeologists. Many of these tombs are rumored to have once housed the bodies of giants, anywhere between 8 to 10 feet tall usually, which are also rumored to have been removed. Now, we interviewed, and this is all in our film, Holocaust of Giants, the third episode in the True Legends documentary film series. We interviewed multiple individuals in Sardinia, some of whom we did not put into the film, who were a party to the extraction of not just random bones of giants, but entire skeletons that were still wearing armor, that were still associated with various implements of war, bows and swords and so forth. And these bodies, these skeletons, were discovered in the ruins, in the Nuragi ruins, and in some cases either in or near the tombs of the giants. However, there's different kinds of tombs on the island. There is a particular kind of tomb, the largest of the variations of the tombs of the giants on the island of Sardinia, which has a very unique and interesting purpose. The function of these particular tombs was not to house the body of a giant, the deceased body of a giant, but rather the body was buried beneath the tomb, and the cavity inside of the tomb, the chamber, the gallery as they call it in Sardinia, inside of the tomb was used as for a rite of passage ceremony in which young people, and this was in an ancient context, certainly the Phoenicians were doing this on the island, in my opinion, the young people, young Phoenician boys, would go into these tombs, would enter these tombs, and there's a small doorway that you have to get down and crouch down or go on your hands and knees to get through. And sometimes these doorways are only big enough so that we're cut only large enough for a boy to enter. A man would have a very difficult time getting into some of these tombs. And the purpose of the chamber, of the gallery, was that the young people would enter the gallery, presumably by themselves, and would spend the night or would spend an extended period of time inside of the tomb, standing above or sitting above the giant, the mighty one that was buried beneath. And the purpose would be for the boy to commune with the deceased mighty one, the deceased entity that was buried beneath the tomb, and to absorb the power, the prowess of that entity. And this was a rite of passage, I believe a Phoenician rite of passage, very likely not only practiced in Sardinia, but in other parts of the earth. Wherever the Phoenicians went, they carried with them, of course, their customs, their culture, but also they carried the seed of the Rephaim, the giants, the Canaanite giants, the Anakim, and they distributed that seed, that genetic line, all over the earth. And I think that's why we can find, at least in many parts of the earth, evidence of a race of post-flood giants that once existed, including in the United States. The Phoenicians, in my estimation, certainly penetrated into the Great Lakes, and that is evidenced by some of these carvings and drawings, the petroglyphs that can be found in and around the Great Lakes region, depicting Phoenician ships, specifically Phoenician ships. So it is a fact of history that the Phoenicians were the greatest seafarers and masons of the ancient world, and that is not coincidental. The reason why they were the greatest seafarers and the greatest masons of the ancient world was because among their populace were the direct descendants of the pre-flood giants, the post-flood Rephaim, the post-flood Anakim, the post-flood Zamzummim. These tribes of giants that existed in the land of Canaan, again before and during the conquest. And I'm sorry for being so long-winded.
Oh, no, it's fascinating.
Responses to your questions.
No, it's fascinating. In fact, you actually answered some questions I had there that I was going to ask you, so I don't actually need to ask you them because you've already done it. But that's awesome. But one thing I will say, when you're talking about the rite of passage and the boys going into the tombs, man, how similar is that to some of these New Apostolic Reformation churches that are sending people to graves to go and soak or grave suck, Yes. I mean, that's a very foolish thing to do. Yes, that's very foolish. In fact, that the rite of passage in Sardinia, which again I believe to be of Phoenician origin, is actually called the rite of incubation, because the young people would incubate inside of the tomb to absorb the spirit of the entity buried beneath. And I absolutely agree that there is something Canaanitish about these charismatic evangelicals that are going and engaging in this absorption of the spirits of the anointing of these of the revivalists or what have you. It smacks of the Phoenician rite of incubation. You're absolutely right. I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that's been concerning us as in a Minute to Midnight team, actually, that whole thing. It's just like, this is way out there. And again, it is getting so much into this occultic kind of realm. But you mentioning Sardinia there, when were actually the last bones unearthed? They're still being extracted to this day. And I have no doubt about that. Again, having been there twice, I'm going again this next year. There's no doubt about it in my mind that the bones are still being extracted. Now, if you talk to some of the elderly people on the island of Sardinia, the ones that would be willing to talk to you concerning this subject,
they will tell you that there was a widespread and well-known, widely publicized in terms of among the in the small villages, cover-up, archaeological cover-up of the bones of giants. The bones of giants were being extracted not only from the Nuraghi ruins and the tombs, they were also being inadvertently uncovered during the rebuilding of Sardinia after World War II, as the roads were being dug up. New foundations were being laid. During World War II, Sardinia was heavily bombed, and so the infrastructure had to be rebuilt. In some cases, new foundations were laid, and as this work was being accomplished, they were discovering, not only among the ruins of the Nuraghi ruins and the tombs, but in various places all over the island, as they're digging up the foundations, they're discovering these bones and entire skeletons and skulls of these gigantic beings, and not only of what we might consider to be your traditional Canaanite type giant, but also cyclopean entities were rumored to have been uncovered. And again, if you speak to some of the elderly inhabitants of the island to this day, although they're dying off quite rapidly, in fact, one of the men that I spoke to, who told me one of the most astounding stories I had ever heard, just passed away a couple of months ago at, I believe, 101 years old.
Okay, so so he died. Okay, that was fascinating what he shared.
He died of old age, and he himself had been involved in uncovering numerous full skeletons of giants in different scenarios. And there are other individuals who are actually, and this is the key, who are actually employed by the municipality, by the government in Sardinia to excavate some of these Nuraghi ruins and tombs with the full knowledge that they would be extracting the bodies of giants anywhere between 9 and 12 feet tall.
And where did they go? Where did they take them?
Well, in some of these cases, for example, let's cite one particular excavation which was known as the excavation of Santa Anastasia, which took place beneath the church of Santa Anastasia in the village of Sardara in Sardinia. And I'm sure that if any of the officials, Sardinian officials, or perhaps VAT agents of the Vatican hear this broadcast, they're not going to be happy, because nobody really knew about this before we really started to publicize it. But beneath the church of Santa Anastasia, which was not functioning at the time, in other words, they were not performing any masses or any other kind of meetings there, there was an excavation occurring because the church had been built on top of the Nuraghi ruins. And so an excavation was commissioned and was underway for some years, I believe 7 years, if memory serves me. And there, we interview in our film 2 individuals who worked on the excavation of Santa Anastasia during its first and during its earlier and then latter phases. Both of these individuals extracted full skeletons of giants, various full skeletons of giants. The first skeletons that were extracted by a man named Giuseppe Pulici were placed inside of the church. They set up a table. Pulici himself built this very large table inside of the church, and the skeletons and all the other artifacts were placed on the tables during the course of the day as they were uncovering them. And then during the night, some unknown agency would come and secret the artifacts away, and they were never told who was taking them or where they were going. And then in the latter phase of the excavation, a man by the name of Roberto was involved, and he, instead of putting the bones of the giants, the skeletons, not just random bones, full skeletons head to foot, he was placing them in the courtyard, laying them out in the courtyard of the church. And he even mentions the name of the individual from the university in the capital city of Cagliari, on the island of Sardinia who came to take the bones, to inspect the bones and take them away, to inspect the skeletons. And he names one Dr. Ugas. And so, and that was, I believe, that took place in the mid 80s or the early 90s. I cannot remember, but that gives you an idea of the kind of excavations that were occurring on the island and that I believe are still occurring to this day. They are extracting the skeletons, full skeletons, not random shin bones or femurs or something that can be confused with a giant sloth or a dinosaur. Full skeletons, sometimes still dressed in armor. One skeleton was discovered by Pulici at the Santa Anastasia excavation. He opened up a chamber and he discovered this enormous skeleton, full skeleton, sitting on a chair with a table in front of him. And on the table was this massive plate and this massive chalice. And on the plate were shells of mussel shells and oyster shells. So here there was this entity, this giant being who was around 10 feet tall, had been eating when he died, and was somehow sealed in this what became a tomb, in this chamber within this megalithic construction. So it's really fascinating stories that we put into our film Holocaust of Giants, and again, not everything that I was told while I was in Sardinia, not all of the interviews I conducted made it into the film. So, and I say that just so that people get a sense of the enormity of what's going on, of the complexity of the cover-up that's taking place all over the world, but specifically on the island of Sardinia, which we have shed light upon. This is a situation which has enjoyed occurring in the shadows, which has enjoyed the shade of ambiguity for some time. And I'm sure that there are many people who are not very happy that we put a spotlight on what has been going on the island for some time.
And it's not only there as well, because that's what ties in, with not only that film, but the previous one, The Unholy See, with the Vatican building churches on ruins and ancient temple sites. What's your take on that?
Well, the Vatican has, and when we say the Vatican, it's really more appropriate to say the Holy See. That is the actual governmental body of the Church of Rome, the Holy See, and is one of the more ancient nomenclatures of the Church of Rome. The Holy See, for many, many years, hundreds, thousands of years, has been engaged in the conquering and the co-opting of pagan religions and peoples all over the earth. And part of the modus operandi of the Vatican, of the Holy See, when they would conquer, let's use Peru as an example, when they conquered the Incan Empire, the conquistadors conquered the Incan Empire, but they were Catholics they were Spaniards. They were loyal to the crown of Spain, but they were also Catholic. So they had loyalties to the king of Spain, but also to the Pope of Rome, and that was representative and represented in their conquest by royal officials who accompanied them from Spain, but then also by clergymen who accompanied them representing the Holy See. And when the conquistadors would conquer a city, for example, the city of Cusco in Peru, they would take they would, in almost every case, hand over the holy sites of the pagan empire, the temples and other sites related to their religion, to their pagan religion, would be turned over, would be given, bequeathed to the Holy See, to the Church of Rome, and would be occupied by various orders among the clergy, among the Catholic orders, including the Jesuits, including the Dominicans, and among others. And so, what happened was, whether um, whether directly or indirectly, in terms of their design, in terms of the purpose of taking over these locations, they became the possessors of, and when I say they, I mean the agents of the Holy See, became the possessors of those archaeological sites, what we would consider today to be archaeological sites, and everything relating to them, including whatever treasures were left after the pillaging of the conquest of the conquistadors. Again, referencing the specific scenario that occurred in Peru with the Incan Empire, they would the Holy See would suddenly find itself in possession of megaliths, of very ancient knowledge, secrets that were not immediately evaluated, identified by the conquerors. The conquistadors, for example, in Peru and in Mexico, in Central and South America, they were looking for gold. They were looking for silver. They were looking for jewels. They were not looking for ancient secrets. They were not looking for knowledge that belonged to the world before the flood of Noah. They were not looking for for artifacts that belonged to giants, or the bodies and the bones of giants, or anything of that nature whatsoever. They were only interested in riches and power. And so if it didn't glitter, if it didn't shine, it didn't matter. However, when these pieces of real estate were handed over to the Holy See, as the years progressed, as the clergy began to recognize and realize what it was that they had inherited, knowledge was able to be accrued, was able to be gathered from the sites that they had co-opted, if you will, that they had taken control of, and artifacts were discovered. And for example, in Peru, the Coricancha, which was the most important temple, pagan temple of the Incan Empire, of the Inca culture, was conquered by the conquistadors. It's in Cusco, and was given over to the Dominican order. And the Dominicans built their own cathedral on top of the Coricancha, the temple of the Inca. But what they did not realize until later on was that beneath the Coricancha there was a megalithic tunnel that ran from the Coricancha to beneath, into the galleries beneath Sacsayhuaman, called the Shinkana. And so there's this subterranean world, an entryway, an entry point into a secret subterranean world that the Holy See inherited and has exploited. And this has happened all over the earth. And so in the beginning, I believe that the Church of Rome was unknowingly inheriting extremely important archaeological artifacts. And then, as they began to realize what was going on a global scale, and as it pertained to the world before the flood, as it pertains to the knowledge of the Watchers, and as it pertains to the occult, they began to purposefully seek to control these locations, these archaeological locations, these megalithic sites, these areas of the world where there are entryways into the underworld. The agents of the Holy See began to purposefully take control of these locations. In the beginning, the motivation was primarily to plant the flag of Christianity over these pagan strongholds. It was a show of dominance and control over a culture, but I believe it quickly morphed into a desire to gather the information and to take control of something that was far more important than a pagan temple, if you know what I mean. So, and while I was in Rome, what I learned and what I know to be true to this day is everybody knows about the Vatican archives, that beneath the Vatican there are the archives, the secret archives, and this is common knowledge and has been publicized, that the Vatican is in control of documents, ancient manuscripts that nobody has ever seen except for the clergy at the Vatican, and among the clergy, very particular individuals at the Vatican, not anyone. Just because you work at the Holy See does not mean that you instantly have access into the archives. No, they're very tightly controlled. And the information, some have said, the information inside of the archives is history changing, would alter our history books, and that is certainly true. But what people do not realize is that there are the Vatican archives, and then there are the Vatican vaults. And in the archives are the manuscripts. In the vaults are the artifacts. And I have no trouble believing whatsoever that some of those artifacts hidden away, sequestered away in the vaults beneath the Vatican and in other areas of the earth, where the Jesuits have their primary their primary locations of operations, such as in Spain and other areas, that there are the bodies of giants, the skeletal remains of giants, and artifacts relating to giants, and artifacts relating to fallen angels and to other entities, artifacts relating to the UFO question and aliens and all kinds of very strange and unknown creatures, histories, and anything pertaining to what doesn't make it into our history books. So that is a reality. And so when you start to peel back the layers of conspiracy, it gets very dark. It gets very dark and nebulous very quickly. It's not two-dimensional. It's not three-dimensional. It is a multi-dimensional, multifaceted, exceedingly complex cover-up that at the very core of it is Luciferianism.
And that's the interesting point, because you mentioned the Jesuits, and of course we actually have a Jesuit as the Pope. First time there's ever been a Jesuit Pope, with Pope Francis, which I don't think is at all coincidence. And you mentioned the Luciferian aspect of it. See, yeah, so there is a Luciferian goal to ultimately bring us towards a one world order, one world government, one world religion. And all of this, I think, is setting the stage for that to be able to occur. So it's not like random pieces happening, because there is a mastermind behind what is going on. And the individuals largely probably don't even know what the master, the overall master plan is. But it is like a whole lot of pieces of the jigsaw puzzle being fitted together by the Luciferian elite. And they, there'll be Catholics that are listening to this that'll be cringing, no doubt. And but there is a Luciferian aspect to the hierarchy within the Vatican.
Yes, that's what is important to understand. This has nothing to do with lay Catholic people any more than the corruption in the United States government has anything to do with the average American citizen. This is a core group of Luciferian initiated individuals operating at the highest levels inside of Vatican City. And these individuals are part of a very ancient order, and going all the way back to Babylon and beyond into the pre-flood world. And therefore, they are very, very interested in artifacts pertaining to the Watchers and to the knowledge that existed, the illicit knowledge, the prohibited knowledge that was being propagated in the earth in the pre-flood context. Because this knowledge is not just philosophical knowledge. This knowledge is technical knowledge. It's mathematical knowledge. It's astronomical knowledge. It's knowledge that equates to nuts and bolts technology. And that's why not only is the entity, which is a nickname for the intelligence agency at the Vatican, not only is the entity interested in that knowledge, but so is the NSA, and so is the Mossad, and so are the intelligence agencies of many, if not all, of the developed nations, because what you're dealing with is Stargate technology. What you're dealing with is time tunnel technology. What you're dealing with is flying craft, the Vimana type flying craft, the UFO flying saucer type vehicles. You're dealing with weapons of war. This is science. And that's why the control and the confiscation of ancient, of archaeological artifacts relating to the pre-flood world is so important to these entities.
So aliens, you mentioned UFOs and things. Are aliens, or are all aliens fallen angels?
No. I think that's an oversimplification.
Yeah.
One thing we need to realize right off the get-go, if we're going to think about these kinds of things, is that human beings have lost their capacity. We have lost our capacity collectively to even contemplate the cosmos and the entities that inhabit the cosmos, including what we glibly refer to as angels. We are, to put it into simpler terms, we are very stupid creatures in comparison to the other entities that function in the universe. And when I say that, I'm referencing the angelic civilization that very clearly exists. There's very clearly a culture, an angelic civilization, angelic technology that is in play, even evidenced in the scriptures. And so the human beings were not created to be what we are today. We were not created to be the dull imbeciles with very low brain capacity, with very low intelligence that we are today. We were created to be Adam, and Adam was just a little lower than the angels. So mankind was very mankind in his original design could naturally interface with entities that were non-human. For example, angels, because Adam was only a little lower than the angels, but because we have degenerated so extremely from Adam. I mean, we are pathetic examples of human beings. We are pathetic specimens of human beings today compared to our progenitor Adam, that we have a very difficult time contemplating anything that's outside of the very limited knowledge that we have accrued collectively as a human society since we began to recover civilization after the flood. And that's a very fancy way of saying that we can't understand the things that are occurring around us because we've lost our ability to perceive, I believe, some of the dimensional realities that are existent in created order. We cannot perceive them any longer. We have lost our ability to see them and to interface with them.
Isn't that part of the Luciferian agenda, that they're actually trying to reawaken those things, which is like the knowledge of good and evil, the tree in the Garden of Eden. And so you see these Luciferian occultic groups, every one of them is trying to attain this enlightened knowledge.
The Luciferians are dedicated to the establishment of an empire that will be ruled by the prince who is to come. That's how they refer to him. And the prince who is to come is the hybrid son of Lucifer. And so, yes, they're dedicated to Lucifer. They're dedicated to the realization of the great plan, which is the realization of the great plan is the resurrection, the reinstitution of the golden age, when the gods walked among men and mingled their seed with the seed of men. And so that is that's the end game for them. And possibly some of those individuals are no longer even human. Maybe they're hybridized at this point. And so when you talk about aliens and alien technology and angels and all of these things, we have a difficult time contemplating these things without engaging in reductionism. without boiling everything down to either a demon or an angel, or a devil or an angel. When it's very likely that before humanity ever existed, before mankind came into existence, there were eons of history that preceded us, not human history, but history. We know that the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, shouted for joy when the earth was created. So they were there before the earth was created, certainly before Adam came into being. And we also tend to engage in a very self-centered humanistic paradigm of everything, of all of history, in which we believe that there is no history without the human race, that everything began when we were created, and everything happens because of us and for us. That is a fallacy. It is a biblical fallacy. The Bible says that everything began with Christ, with Jesus in the beginning, and that everything exists through him and for him and by him. And so whether human beings are in the picture or not, things are happening. There's history is happening. Certainly angelic history happened before we showed up on the scene. We're newcomers. We are, to use a colloquialism, we are the new kids on the block, and there are the other creatures, entities that are much older in existence than we are, and so we have entered into their reality. We showed up in a world that was pre-existent to us, and therefore we have a very difficult time to rightly discern and understand our place in the world. And we humanize history when there is no reason to do that, at least not in the context of the Bible, because there are very clearly entities that existed before us. So why am I saying that? I'm saying that because the question of UFOs and aliens is exceedingly complex. You're dealing with, in my estimation, you're dealing with angelic type entities. So let's just say a civilization that pre-existed human civilization, whatever that might be. You're also dealing with possibly pre-Adamic entities, entities that maybe perhaps inhabited the earth before the offspring of Adam. And then you're dealing with hybrid entities, entities that came into existence through the illicit activities of the Watchers in the Genesis 6 affair, that were hybrids of not only the Watchers, these angelic entities with the daughters of Adam, but also hybrids of these angelic entities with animals. In other words, angels copulated with animals and created all kinds of monstrous hybrids on the earth. And so you have this mixture of elements, of dynamics that are all true, all at the same time, and are all happening together on the earth and off of the earth. And you have a history that predates human beings. So you put all of these things together, and what I'm really trying to illustrate here is that the human brain, the human mind, hardly has the capacity to even conceive of these things, let alone understand them. So, but what is evident, always evident, especially in the pages of Scripture, is the gospel of Jesus Christ. We know that Jesus is the exclusive Savior of the human race. He's the Son of God who died for the sins of humanity, so that we might be rectified to God, and also that we might also be reinstated in our rightful role as human beings on the earth through Christ, the second Adam. And everything pertaining to the gospel is quite evident in Scripture, because that's the most important information for the human race. That is the knowledge, the most precious and important knowledge that we could ever obtain as human beings, is the knowledge of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it pertains to our very salvation, the hope of our salvation, the resurrection from the dead, and the rectification of the human condition. However, that does not mean that there are not other histories and other information, not necessarily even pertaining to the human race, that exists in the world, and entities that exist in the world that are not human and that are not really an integral part of our story as human beings on the earth. Now, am I saying that there are civilizations living on other planets? I don't know if I'm saying that, to be honest with you. I don't know if there are or there are not. I do know that there is an angelic civilization. And what I do know, again, unequivocally, is that the gospel of Jesus Christ is true. And that human history has been recorded in the pages of Scripture and is accurate. Outside of that, I'm not willing to make any definitive statements concerning what exactly aliens are and where exactly they come from. And I apologize for such a complicated and, again, long-winded answer. But
that's great. It's full of awesome information, and it certainly gets my mind ticking over. You know, I'm thinking we as Christians are waiting eagerly, you know, the second coming of Jesus Christ, and we know that, you know, that He is coming again. I fully believe that, and we see in the book of Revelation that there's a great battle at the end, the Battle of Armageddon, and we believe, you know, that God will at that point take control back in a sense and throw the you know, the beast and the false prophet in the lake of fire and etc. But that's a different view than what the other side, the followers of Lucifer, actually believe. And I got to say, I listened to an interview earlier this year where you were with Fritz Springmeier, and I really like Fritz too. I've had him on the show as well, and you know, I admire him and respect him. But to me, the absolute highlight of that show was your summation at the end, using Psalm 2 as the basis for the global war. You know, you're saying, what weapons do these people think they can bring to overthrow God? So perhaps you could close us out by talking a little bit on that.
Well, this is the culmination of human history. The culmination, the blessed hope of the human race is our restitution, is our rectification. And what does that mean? That means that we have fallen far from what Adam was created to be. As I said before, we're pathetic specimens of human beings. But there's hope. There's hope that through the cross and the resurrection of the dead in Jesus, that we will be reinstituted and reinstated into our proper role as human beings on the earth, because the gospel was never about going to heaven. The gospel was always about rectifying the human condition, i.e., sin and death that came as a result of what occurred in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, and to rectify men to God, to restore men back to God. And it was the cross, it was the sacrifice of the cross, the very Son of God himself dying so that our sins might be forgiven and we might be restored to the Father and restored to what Adam was originally created to be, and even more so, because now we will be seated with Christ. And now we are not reset to the blueprint of Adam. We are reset to the blueprint of the second Adam in the resurrection, Jesus Christ himself. And this is the culmination of the gospel, which is so little preached from pulpits, if preached at all, not only in the United States, but worldwide. See, we don't realize what is the hope of humanity. It isn't just to avoid hell. The hope of humanity is to be reinstated, is to be rectified, is the restitution of humanity to what it was originally created to be, which is a glorious thing. And that's what we find in the second coming of Christ. He's not just coming to do away with evildoers on the earth, to punish evildoers and to reward those who have done good. He is coming to rule and to reign, to take dominion of the earth, not only as the Son of God, but more importantly, as it pertains to our scenario, as the Son of Man. He is the rightful ruler of Adam's domain, because he is the second Adam. And And when Christ comes, he comes to take the dominion, to take the kingdom that was promised to him by his Father from the beginning. That's the context that we find in Psalm 2. Indeed, we have evil rulers. We have, and I believe that among the rulers, we're not just dealing with human rulers. We're dealing with the principalities and powers, the devil himself, who have in the end times. This has yet to occur. I believe it will occur in the coming in the coming days, the coming decades, or what have you. That the devil himself will usurp the throne that belongs to Christ by creating a hybridized child, by inseminating a woman and producing, procreating his own hybridized half-human son, who I believe is the Antichrist. And so the earth is at some point in the future, before the end of the age, is taken over. The dominion of the human race is usurped, and there is a rebel insurgency on the earth against God. And this insurgency, led by the devil himself and led by his kings, who are spoken of in the book of Daniel and spoken of in the book of Revelation, the 10 kings who rule over the earth, who are in league with the devil, who are insubordinate against God. They're rebels, rebel kings, and they're not human, and their offspring are hybrids. So there are non-human, angelic, fallen angel kings ruling the earth from behind the thrones of their hybridized sons. This is the scenario. I'm not making this up. This is the Daniel scenario. This is the Revelation scenario that is vividly painted in scriptures. And it is in this context that Psalm 2, that the second Psalm is playing out. So you have the earth dominated by the devil, by his rulers, and by their hybridized children, the kings of the earth, that are plotting against God, to overthrow God. And the reply in Psalms 2 is very powerful by God. And Psalms 2 says, "Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, against his son, saying, let us burst their bonds asunder and cast their cords from us." Now, the question is, the nations are conspiring against God and against his son. With full knowledge of who the Father is and who the Son is, they are devising, conspiring against him to go to war with him. So then that, of course, begs the question, what kind of weapons do you bring to the table in a war with God, in a war with the angels of heaven? That right there tells you that this is not these plotters, these people who are, these entities that are taking counsel against the Lord, these kings of the earth are not just human kings. This is talking about the principalities, the powers, the hybridized offspring of the fallen angels, and the fallen angels themselves, of course, subservient to the devil, are taking counsel against the Lord to take dominion of the earth, to usurp the throne that belongs to the Son of God. And what is God's reply? What is his response to this plot, to this conspiracy? He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, yet have I set my king on my holy hill of Zion. In other words, God laughs at them and he declares, I have ordained for my king, my son, to sit on the throne of dominion over the earth, the throne that belongs to him and him alone. And we know that that is the case because the next verse reads, I will tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son, referring to the Son of God, Jesus. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned. O rulers of the earth, serve the Lord with fear, with trembling. Rejoice, or kiss his feet, is how that is translated in some versions, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. This is prophesying about the coming scenario on the earth in which the devil will try to usurp the throne of Christ with his own offspring, and the 10 kings in the book of Revelations, the book of Daniel, hybridized kings in league with their fathers, fallen angels, and in league with the devil himself, and their liege lord, who is the son, the offspring of the devil, the prince who is to come, the man of sin, the Antichrist. And the Lord's response to this conspiracy is that he laughs, because he has decreed that his son will sit on the throne of Adam's dominion, which is planet Earth. And this is, of course, the end of the matter. And this is what will happen in the earth. It is our hope. And again, Christians too often are infatuated with the idea of going away to heaven. It's not about going away to heaven. It's about Jesus receiving what is rightfully his in the end, taking what is rightfully his in the end, which is the dominion of Adam's domain, and us, we, his people, ruling and reigning with him on the earth. And that, as I said, is the end of the matter. It is the part of the gospel that is so often overlooked and not very often preached from the pulpits of America or anywhere else for that matter.
That is an amazing summation of things. And two things that come to my mind there as you're speaking that. One is, and I've said it many times, I simply, for the reasons that you've just brought out, I can't see the Antichrist or the beast system being Islamic or Islam as we know it. And I know there are plenty of people out there that believe it will be, but for the very fact of what you mentioned, I can't see it being. I mean, Islam will be part of the great world religion in some form or other. But Revelation 13:4 says, and they worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to make war with him. And, straight off we see that it's the dragon that's worshipped. It is Satan. It's, Lucifer. He's not going to be content with being worshipped as a proxy, like an Islamic imam or something. He's going to be wanted people to know exactly who he's worshipping. And the other thing that came to my mind is these Luciferians, the Illuminati, the people that are behind this move towards a one world government. These people are on the losing side, and they need salvation just like the rest of us do.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. This is not a question of Islamic rule or even Illuminati rule. The key, the cipher of understanding the rulers of the kingdom to come before Christ returns and establishes his kingdom is in the very word beast, the kingdom of the beast. He's called the beast. Why is he the beast? Because he is not human. He is a hybrid. He's hybridized with the dragon, and his 10 kings likewise are hybridized with the 10 kings of the dragon. And this is very clearly depicted in the book of Revelation. So this is not a question of some human dictatorship over the earth. This is the direct hybridization of the human race. I believe the collective hybridization of the human race. A large-scale hybridization is going to take place in the future. We don't have time to get into that here at the end of the show, but certainly this kingdom of the beast is a hybrid kingdom. It is the reinstitution, the resurrection of the golden age, which was the first hybrid age. And any other interpretation other than this being a hybridized kingdom is, in my estimation, falling short of what the Bible depicts in both Daniel and the book of Revelation.
And I 100% agree with you. Absolutely. You've nailed it. And you've said it so much more eloquently than what I would ever say, but I think you've said it, and I fully agree with you. Your way of looking at it makes far more sense to me than so many of the other interpretations I see of the end time kingdom and the beast and who the Antichrist is. Tim, I just want to say this has been an awesome interview, and I have absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm absolutely sure our listeners will get a heck of a lot out of this. And just before we sign out there, Tim, can you give our listeners a link to, or tell them where they can find you on the internet, what your website availability is?
Yes, I am currently building a website called timothyalberino.com. It's not up yet. Hopefully it will be up in a month or so. But for those who are interested in seeing our films from Gen 6 Productions, you can go to truelegendstheseries.com. That's truelegendstheseries.com. You can access all of our films there on that website. You can also follow us on our Gen 6 Productions YouTube channel. That's GENSIX Productions on YouTube. And as I said, I will have a website coming out in a month or so.
That's awesome. And I want to reiterate to people, get your hands on those videos, the DVDs, the True Legends DVDs. They're worth every minute of the watching.
And you can stream them. You can stream them on Vimeo if you live overseas. So that option is also available.
Awesome. So I want to thank you so much for coming on the A Minute to Midnight show, and I would really love to have you back.
Well, Tony, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And certainly I would enjoy coming back on your show.
That's awesome. So until then, the next time, thank you again. This has just been such a great show. Folks, I recommend that you go to aminutetomidnight.com, and down the bottom of the page where you see subscribe by email, you will want to do that to subscribe to Following A Minute to Midnight, because we will be putting our shows on our website first and foremost ahead of YouTube. We also put them on iTunes, but our website is our main hub. We have a forum, new community forum there, which you're welcome to join as well. Having had temporary bans on both Facebook and YouTube, there is no guarantee that our YouTube channel won't be taken down by them at some point. So definitely I would suggest going to aminutetomidnight.com as your primary source of following our shows. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, but our website's the main hub of our focus now. And we do run this entirely by donations. We greatly appreciate the people that help support A Minute to Midnight with your donations, and you can find a chance to do that on our website. I write, play and record all the music that's in our shows, and you can find some of my music on our website as well. And our community forum is a great place to share information with everyone as well. So that's about it for this show. It was an awesome interview with Tim, and hope you enjoyed it. We will catch you soon in the next episode of the A Minute to Midnight show. Until then, this is Tony signing off.